I just think people like stories. Jesus told stories. You have stories throughout the Old Testament. We have this great young adult in our church, and she's doing a PhD dissertation now on parables in the Old Testament. And it's fascinating. She said when Nathan confronted David, he could have quoted the Ten Commandments, but instead he told him a story. I think because people will listen to a story, and they'll listen without being all that defensive. And so stories can sort of sneak in the back door, I guess, and they're memorable and they're fun. And so I think for all those reasons, they're important. All right, how do I collect stories? Well, I think that as a preacher, you're kind of always living in the midst of just stories that drip. Things you read, things you see, um, experiences you have, memories. Um, I think that one of Spurgeon's great gifts was that he had what Helmut Thielicke called a charismatic ear. He had sort of an ear that was attuned to hearing God in the midst of the world. And I think probably every preacher needs to pray for that gift, the gift of hearing and the gift of seeing. And you have to pay attention. And I think to pay attention, you have to slow down, and you have to be curious and nosy, and you have to be a people watcher. I think Jesus was a people watcher. He's in the temple, crowded temple, and everybody's going here and there, and there's noise, and there's animals probably, and smells, and all kind of weird stuff, and he sees an old woman, tossing some coins in, and he stops. He says, "Come here," he's a busy day, and there's a bureaucratic breakdown in his ministry. One of those sort of church conflicts. The disciples are rushing the kids aside, and he stops. And he sees a sermon. He sees a message. He says, "Bring the kid over here." So you got old ladies with copper and little babies with diapers, and he just stops it. And so I think you have to live fully in the world, drinking it all in, and be able to kind of stop it. I think that pastors need to be sort of gonzo theologians. Hunter Thompson, they called him a gonzo journalist because he believed the best way to write a story, it's probably terrible journalism, but he said the best way to write a story is just to submerge yourself into the experience and write as an insider. And I think as a pastor, you want to be a gonzo theologian. You want to immerse yourself into the experience of the world and God, and write as an insider, and just paying attention to things. I think that's how Jesus did it. So part of it is spiritual. Part of it is part of your walk with God. Part of it is, God, please help me to see this world and all that's in it with your eyes of grace. Help me to see these things. And so movies take on a little different edge. Art takes on a little different edge. Music, the New York Times, about everything. And read widely, read deeply. I've never met an interesting preacher that wasn't just a voracious reader, and just enjoy life, and be curious, be interested, be a little nosy, ask questions, and collect them. Now, how do I physically collect them? Man, I use little books. Normally, I use a composition book, the cheap, speckly black and white on the outside. I've got a stack of those, in my office in a box. But this one was given to me free, so it's even cheaper than a composition book. But I just kind of always have something like that with me. And if I read something, I'll put it in here. Like, for instance, this was from the paper back in April. It's about this woman. She's a poor woman in New York, and she had this infant child that died, and he's gonna be buried in a potter's field. And there was a screw up, and she went to visit him for the first time, and they couldn't find him. They lost the body of her son. And the title of this piece, this is in the New York Times: "Wrenching words on first trip to son's grave. He isn't here." And when I saw that for the first time, I thought of the end of Luke, where the women go when it's like dark morning. If you've ever been like deer hunting, you get out there in the dark morning, where before the sun rises, so you can be ready for everything. You can't see anything. It's a sort of disorienting time. I've been lost in the woods in the dark morning, in the early morning, and so they went there that early morning, and the tomb is empty, and it says that he wasn't there, and instead of singing "Up from the Grave," it said they were very perplexed. And when I read this, I thought, God, that's what the women experienced. That's what they felt, and it was horrifying. And so you just kind of walk through, and so you find something like this, you don't throw it away. Probably a better thing to do nowadays is just take a picture of it or do something electronically. But I'm kind of a Luddite in some ways. I do a lot better when I scribble down things and hold on to them. I think there's maybe even some research saying that's a better way to go. That maybe not. I don't know. But it's how I do it. And so I always have to have something sort of physical to scribble. And so that's the way to do it. So you just keep up with those things and then go back through them and read them from time to time. That's how you do it in a big level. Now, week to week, you just have to go to the text and you begin with the text. Don't start with your stories. Begin with the text. And then you go back through that catalog of stories, and if something helps it, go for it. If not, leave it on the floor. I do think the audience matters, the people that are congregated there. You want to read that group of folks. I think it's important for stories to fit you, however. And so, if you're going into a room full of nuclear physicists, you may be tempted to tell a story that's from nuclear physics. Well, if you have no clue about nuclear physics, probably not smart to Google something and go in with a story, because it's going to smell funny, And so I think probably more important than anything is this story consistent with who I am and as a speaker, as a teacher? Can I tell this story authentically? Is it something that I can tell well? But at the same time, I think you do have to gauge how you tell a story with a group of people, how you go about it. Sometimes it's age dependent, but I preach in a diverse room, with a diverse group of people, generationally, economically, so forth and so on. So, I give kind of a more broader thing, but I think if you're in a men's group, for instance, you can go in a certain way that's a little different. If you're invited to one of those kind of early morning prayer kind of things, and so I think you have to judge what's appropriate and when and where. I've heard sermons preached on seminary campuses that I wouldn't particularly think would be helpful in another environment. In fact, a lot of first sermons are wherever they preach them, they're aimed at seminarians and professors, and that I think that's just rookie mistakes. And I think one of the ways you can learn about this is develop kind of feedback loops. People you can talk to about things, and sometimes just getting out there and doing it, you begin to learn what engages people and what doesn't. So for me, I'm a dad, and so I have to think about the use of personal stories and how that is either appropriate or inappropriate from time to time. I have one kid who would love for me to have 80% of the illustrations in the sermon be about them, and then another one, and they're very close in age, that would just rather hide under a pew than have me tell a story. So we have to be sensitive to people, and if you tell a personal story about someone in the church or whatever, it may be very helpful. Make sure you clear that first and talk through that. Sometimes it's an important way to honor somebody, and their experience with God, but they don't need to be shocked by that when they come to church, And so let that be something that's part of your pastoral ministry as well. I think one of the things about audience is I've seen pastors, and we're all tempted to do this when you get in a conflict situation. You see pastors that are using every sermon as a hammer. And you're like, who's she talking about now? Who is he talking about now? And I just don't know that that's ever appropriate. I don't think it is. So I mean, you have to be sensitive to how this is being processed, and I have had to change sermon illustrations walking into the sanctuary before because of conversations that I've had in the hallway. Because I said, you know what, if I go ahead with that story like I was going to tell it, or that point like I was going to give it, this person is going to think that I was responding to that. And I don't think that's an overreaction. I think you have to be sensitive, and care. And doesn't mean you don't say hard things, but you just want to honor the preaching of the word, with it being that, and not your little deal, because that cheapens what it is. Is that helpful?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, I think that's a fantastic question. I really do, because I have heard over the years, I've heard the same stories again and again, and sometimes people kind of own them as their own, and sometimes they were attributed to 3 or 4 different people. And so, I think we're living in an age where things are immediately fact checked in the sanctuary. I mean, I will say something, and I know that people are immediately on their phone looking it up, and I think that's a really important safeguard for pastors. And if they have that kind of ability immediately, it's only the lazy pastor that doesn't fact check their own things, And I think you always want to attribute. It's not like a sermon needs a list of footnotes printed in the worship guide or something, but I think sermons need quotation marks. You need to. I was reading in this or that. And I think that's great. I think that it lets people start thinking through things. One of the challenges that comes with that, though, is that I have a couple people that just go out and buy and read everything that I quote in the sermon. And sometimes, I want them to be edified by the whole thing. And sometimes, there's some horrible, kind of crazy things in there. And so you have to preface some things like, you're not going to find Larry Brown's novels at Mardell or something like that, and prepare people for that. I think you can find a lot of beauty in a lot of things, but you need to prepare people for that. And I think plagiarism is real, and plagiarism in the pulpit is real. I don't know how big and widespread it is. I've heard different things about that, but I think it is a reality, and I think it's not a good thing. But it can be avoided pretty easily. And a lot of times people get in trouble for the stupidest things when they can just say, I read this here, and it meant a lot to me. I mean, is it any more impressive to say, this is what I thought, or this meant a lot to me? I mean, this is kind of stupid. So, make appropriate, attribute appropriately. And I think if you write a story, I think that's okay just to tell it like it's yours. There's no reason to say, I wrote this parable for your listening enjoyment. If it's yours, just do it. Don't call attention to it. Just do it. I heard Dr. Garland do something one time. He was telling an old Tony Campolo story. And a lot of people said that Tony Campolo just totally made it up, but that he presented it like it really happened, and so it was kind of a controversial story. And Dr. Garland kind of made a point of it. He said, "Well, some people say that this never really happened." He said, "Let's just call it a parable." And in it had because it had a great thing. It was a humorous way to deal with it. And so, I think you just have to be careful about integrity, and also, what are you trying to get across? And what are you trying to accomplish? Is it for people to hear something, or for you to be heard? And I think that a lot of times people say, I just want to say this, I just want to, and it's just, I think it's a craving for affirmation and being important, and I think preachers man, we struggle with that so bad, and I think that you gotta think of it in terms of, I want them to hear this message, you know, and I want them to hear it, and I'd like to kind of, I mean, you're never going to get out of the picture, and because personality is important, and I mean, I I heard a guy say one time, he said, I went back to the thing, and it's back at the sanctuary, and they were coming through, and they were saying, it's a good sermon today, Pastor, way to go, a good sermon, way to go, appreciate that today, and he was sanctimonious, he said, it wasn't me, brother, it was the Lord. And my guy came to me and said, well, it wasn't that good. And so you're never going to take yourself away from that, but you do want to be appropriately placed within the preaching event. And I think when we fail in these plagiarism issues, or when we don't attribute right, or when we call attention to our preaching craft instead of the message, I wrote this thing for you. It's just because we want to be heard. And that's just an issue we got to deal with before God and our friends. Every pastor needs some people that are just not impressed with them, who are going to be their friends, and who are going to be their friends on those good Sundays and bad Sundays and everything in between. And we all need that kind of thing, and I think that safeguards us from those kind of failures of preaching integrity, and keeps us from having a swagger in the pulpit. The great preachers, they don't have that swagger. They just do it,